Call of Duty Black Ops improved upon the formula of the Zombies mode of World at War by polishing up many of the core mechanics of the mode. When it comes to movement mechanics specifically, Black Ops added 2 new ones and restructured the existing ones. While Black Ops 2 did not implement any new movement mechanics to the game mode, it further expanded upon existing ones to give the game a feeling of increased complexity. Some of the ways this was achieved was through the addition of unique weapon classes, assigning unique movement qualities to weapons within predefined weapon classes, and the first implementation of weapon attachments within the Zombies mode. In my opinion, the movement in Black Ops 2 Zombies felt like it was a fully fleshed out version of the movement mechanics from the original Black Ops. As I mentioned in my video covering the player movement in Black Ops, the main calculations I performed were calculations of the player's speed relative to walking with the M1911 starting pistol. This involved measuring the time it took to travel across a predetermined route on a map with the M1911 pistol, and dividing that time by the time it took to travel the same route using a different weapon or a different movement method. Multiplying the result by 100% yielded the relative movement speed as a percentage. Relative movement speeds were calculated for a variety of movement methods, all of which are listed on screen. Other calculations I will discuss in this video involve comparing simple time measurements for certain conditions, like how long the player can sprint for and how long the player must wait in order to fully charge their sprint duration. A separate video will be released containing the jump mechanics from World at War to Black Ops 4, and dolphin diving mechanics in Black Ops and Black Ops 2, sometime after I finish the video on Black Ops 4 movement mechanics. Since the testing methods and analysis of the data are more complicated and subject to error than the mechanics discussed in this video, I felt as though making a separate video discussing my methods and conclusions would allow me to go into greater depth and more accurately portray my findings. The footage for all of my testing for this video is saved in separate videos, which will be uploaded alongside this one and linked in the description. All of my calculations are also included into a document in Google Sheets, and that is also linked in the description if you would like to look at or analyze the data for yourself. All the results discussed in this video were derived from tests ran on the zombie maps Transit, Nuketown Zombies, Mob of the Dead, Buried, and Origins. I had to test so many maps this time around because many maps have map-exclusive weapons. The spreadsheet I linked in the description briefly describes the routes used on each of these maps, and the test footage shows each route. All of the compiled footage was saved in 60 frames per second, which means that barring any systemic error in the time measurements, most of the calculated percentages are subject to an error of approximately 1%, and average time measurements are subject to an error of approximately 1/60th of a second. So the first test I conducted in analyzing the player's walking speed was a test to see how the 100% movement speed compared between Black Ops 2 and the previous installments of Zombies. To do so, I loaded up everyone's favorite map, Transit, knifed some zombies, drank some fish juice, and rode the infamous bus to the diner, where I discovered that God does, in fact, exist. Then, the bus took me to the ranch, and finally to some cornfields, where the spawn of Nocturne Toten rests. Once there, I walked with the M1911 in the Noct spawn room and measured the average time it took to do so. In comparing this time to time measured from World at War and Black Ops, I found that walking with the M1911 in Black Ops 2 yields a time that is only 1 frame faster than that of World at War, and less than 1 frame faster than that of Black Ops. Since I established that the error associated with these measurements is plus or minus 1 frame, I thought it was reasonable to assume that these movement speeds are identical. This conclusion also relies on the assumption that the proportions of Nocturne and Toten were unchanged between games, which I also believe is a reasonable assumption to make. To test how player walking speed varies with equipped weapon, I tested all non-wonder weapons available on Transit, Nuketown Zombies, Mob of the Dead, Buried, and Origins. When I had collected all the data, I found that the best way to organize movement speeds was a tier system containing 7 distinct tiers. Weapons in the very fast tier have 110% movement speed while walking, and these weapons include the ballistic knife, Chicom CQB, and MP5. Weapons within the fast tier have 100% movement speed while walking, and these include the pistols, shotguns, and SMGs, barring the Chicom and MP5. Weapons within the average tier have 95% movement speed while walking, and these weapons include the ARs and sniper rifles. Weapons within the slow tier have 90% movement speed while walking, and these include the LSAT, MG0815, and RPG. Weapons within the very slow tier have 88% movement speed while walking, and these weapons include the RPD and the hammer. The weapon in the extremely slow movement tier has 80% movement speed while walking, and this weapon is the War Machine. The only weapon in the incredibly slow tier only has 60% movement speed while walking, and this weapon is the Death Machine. It should be noted that there were a few deviations from this tier system that I believe are worth mentioning. Calculated speeds were 109% for the MP5 and Chicom CQB. Calculated speeds were 99% for the Uzi and PDW-57, and calculated speeds were 96% for the Ballista, STG-44, M27, M8A1, and Type 25. Upon looking at the data, the deviations for these weapons from other weapons in their movement tiers could have just been the result of measurement error, so I'm hesitant to assign entirely different movement tiers to these weapons. As for the results of the tier system itself, I was unsurprised to see the ballistic knife once again was in the fastest tier of movement. Its main weakness is that it cannot deal damage to zombies very quickly once it stops being a 1 or 2 knife kill, so the high mobility is used to cover for that weakness. The Chicom CQB also appears in the highest tier to cover for its weaknesses in being a low damage 3-round burst weapon available only in the mystery box and having a small ammo pool. The inclusion of the MP5 within the highest movement tier was a bit confusing for me. It has the same damage and almost the same ammo count as the Chicom, while also having full auto fire and being purchasable off the wall. As such, it completely invalidates the Chicom in almost every meaningful way. While the low damage and ammo pool justify giving the MP5 higher movement speed than the other weapons in the 100% movement tier, I would think that the MP5 should have been given a slightly slower movement speed than the Chicom, so that players have at least one reason to actually take the Chicom out of the box. The SMGs, pistols, and shotguns in the fast tier all have advantages in damage or ammo count over the MP5 and Chicom. When compared to weapons within the average tier, the weapons within the fast tier are usually at a disadvantage by having less damage, semi-auto fire, and or short effective ranges. As such, it makes sense that weapons in the fast tier have higher mobility than the weapons that are in the average tier. Now if we look at the bottom of the tier list, giving the lowest mobility to the Death Machine makes sense since it has extremely high damage, an insanely fast fire rate, and one of the largest ammo pools. The War Machine can deal a lot of explosive damage very quickly, so it also makes sense to give it low mobility. Since the War Machine is widely considered to be less useful than the Death Machine, it makes sense to give it slightly higher mobility than that of the Death Machine. It should be stated that both of these weapons actually obtain a movement speed boost when they are upgraded. The upgraded War Machine has 100% movement speed while walking, and the upgraded Death Machine has 80% movement speed while walking. I feel as though these boosts give the player incentives to hang on to these weapons, even if they dislike the unupgraded movement speeds. When looking at the RPG specifically, it deals decent explosive damage and has a respectable ammo pool for an explosive weapon. It doesn't have quite the same damage potential as the War Machine, so giving it higher mobility than the War Machine, but less mobility than the ARs and the sniper rifles also makes sense. As for the LMGs, they have large magazines, moderate to high damage, and large ammo reserves, so it also makes sense for them to have slower movement speeds than the weapons in the average tier. Something that doesn't quite make as much sense at first is why the LSAT and MG08 actually get higher mobility than that of the Hammer and RPD. while I could not initially come up with an explanation for this phenomenon, I found through my other testing that the LSAT and MG08 actually have lower mobility than the hammer and RPD when you're walking and aiming down sight. As such, I suspect that the higher walking speed and slower ADS walking speed of the LSAT and MG08 when compared to the RPD and the hammer is just another way to make the weapons feel unique. It gives the player more options based on what characteristics they prefer. If they prefer faster ADS walking speed, they might choose the hammer over the LSAT. If they prefer faster walking speed, they might make the opposite decision. In testing sprint speeds, sprint duration, and sprint recharge, I found that these mechanics have been mostly unchanged from the original Black Ops. Sprint speed is still equal to the player walking speed multiplied by a factor of 1.5, taking into account, of course, what weapon the player has equipped. The player's sprint recharges by 1 second for every second the player walks or stands still, and stops charging once the maximum sprint duration is achieved. The only change to sprint mechanics in Black Ops 2 is a slight change to how sprint duration is reliant on the equipped weapon. The sprint duration for all weapons is 4 seconds, much like how it is in Black Ops, but there are 2 exceptions to this rule. The ballistic knife allows the player to sprint for 4.4 seconds, but the death machine only allows the player to sprint for 2 seconds. I think this is a bit of an extreme nerf to place on the death machine, since it is the only weapon which gives a player a walking speed which is actually slower than the zombie's sprint speed. I wish that the developers would have either made the sprint duration for the death machine 4 seconds and maintained its extremely low mobility, or given it just the short sprint duration, but mobility that's more on par with the war machine, so that the player can just slightly outrun the zombies. When I tested how stamina up works in Black Ops 2, I found out that it works identically to how it worked in Black Ops. Firstly, it has no effect on player walking speed, and it has no effect on the sprint recharge rates. Secondly, stamina up doubles the player's sprint duration, and then lastly, stamina up allows the player to move at 165% movement speed while sprinting, regardless of the equipped weapon. When looking at the crouch walking and crawling mechanics, I found that they work the same in Black Ops 2 as they did in the original Black Ops. Across all weapons, crouching applies a 0.66 multiplier to the player walking speed, taking into account the equipped weapon in their hands, and crawling does the exact same thing, except with a 0.16 multiplier. In the original Black Ops, there were 2 rules which governed walking speeds while aiming down sight. Black Ops 2 added 2 additional rules, bringing the total to 4. Rule number 1 is that walking speeds for pistols, shotguns, and SMGs are affected by a 0.80 multiplier while aiming down sight. The 2 exceptions to this rule are the Olympia shotgun and the MP40. So this rule is unchanged from Black Ops. The Olympia and MP40 get the short end of the stick here, which was likely a design decision to make them feel like their counterparts from Black Ops. Rule number 2 is that holding the ADS button while equipping the death machine, ballistic knife, or the MP40 with adjustable stock does not apply a multiplier to the player walking speed. So holding the ADS button with the ballistic knife does nothing, so it makes sense to leave the player's movement speed unchanged. Holding the ADS button while equipping the death machine causes the death machine's barrel to spin, but does not provide the player with any boost in accuracy. For this reason, I think not slowing down the player is justifiable. The adjustable stock attachment allows the MP40 to move with 100% movement speed while aiming down sight, which is extremely powerful. However, one must consider that in order to get the MP40 with this attachment, they have to get it out of the mystery box on Origins. There are multiple locations where the player can just buy the base MP40 off the wall, so this buffed MP40 serves as more of an incentive for the player to hit the box, which is already not very incentivized on Origins. Rule number 3 is that walking speeds for the LSAT and MG0815 are 32% while aiming down sight. As mentioned previously, the LSAT and MG0815 were likely given unique aiming down sight walking speeds to balance out their faster walking speed than the other LMGs, and also to make the LMGs feel more unique from one another. The last rule, rule number 4, is that walking speeds for all other weapons are 40% when aiming down sight. Like rule number 1, this rule is unchanged from Black Ops. This rule gives an additional incentive to use SMGs, shotguns, and pistols over the higher damage ARs, LMGs, and sniper rifles. Black Ops 2 Zombies expanded on the improvements made in Black Ops to add an additional level of complexity to the movement within the game. However, there were no new mechanics introduced in this game. This goes along with the idea that Black Ops 2 was looking to fully flesh out the ideas and systems implemented in Black Ops. The next video will cover Black Ops 3, which introduced a variety of new movement mechanics and also reworked many of the old ones. Weapon attachments and gobblegums bring even more complexity to player movement, which I really look forward to analyzing and presenting to you guys. So be on the lookout for that video sometime next week, as it has been and probably will be the video that I spend the most time on by far for raw data collection, analysis, and production. If you found this video helpful or at the very least interesting, I would really appreciate a like, comment, or subscribe. I want this channel to be an outlet for more highly edited content or post-commentary videos like this one, so any feedback on the editing of this video or the content itself would be greatly appreciated. I also stream on Twitch at twitch.tv/spknhn, usually every Monday, Wednesday, Friday at around 8:30 p.m. Eastern Time. So if you're more interested in live commentary or gameplay style content, feel free to go check that out as well and maybe give me a follow. Anyways, if you're still here, thanks for sticking around to the end of the video. I really appreciate that. Have a nice day, you guys, and I'll see you around.